Well, there's a big Supreme Court case coming up that could exonerate a lot of the folks that have been warehoused, stuffed into jail cells ever since January the 6th. They continue to go out and try to arrest people while our border remains wide open. Priorities seem to be completely out of whack. I guess pro-Palestinian protesters can get the White House evacuated, but that's okay. That's not an insurrection when they're violently attacking the White House. Joining me today is Tim Hale, a 33-year-old Army Reserve veteran, just recently released from jail after spending nearly 3 years incarcerated for non-violent offenses back on January the 6th. Tim finally ready to break his silence and talk about his experience. Tim, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you so much for having me on. And yeah, there's a lot to say about the captivity. There's a lot to say about that 1512 charge too. And
so let's talk about this. Yeah, you just got out, you told me in the break, December the 15th. You were there almost 3 years. And during a year of that time, you were in solitary confinement. What earned you solitary confinement?
Well, for those of us who were brought to the D.C. jail, they were using COVID as an excuse to punish Trump supporters. It was a way to crush our spirits and theoretically to force us into taking plea deals. Didn't really work for everybody. And so basically, lockdowns 23-1, that was a way to essentially to crush us. And I think to some extent, I'm not sure what amount of it came from the DOJ. There was a Trump-hating warden that was in charge of the DC jail, so a lot of it was retaliatory. A lot of those guards took January 6th very personally, but they did mellow with time. So, as you kind of hinted at, it wasn't solitary the entire time I was in there. It did eventually, like I say, mellow out, and they loosened the restrictions after about a year. But, the real problems, honestly, Steve, the real problems with the DC jail aren't even the solitary confinement. That's one aspect. That's cruel and unusual. But you weren't allowed to see your lawyer for most of the time there. You weren't allowed to get your evidence to build your case. You weren't allowed religious services. You couldn't see your family. No visitation rights. There was a point where, I had gone 16 months without a haircut. I looked like a caveman, even worse than this stuff. The fact is, basic civil rights were out the window. Bill of Rights, gone. 14th Amendment, equal protection, gone. Because the other inmates in that jail.
How in the world, Tim, did they pass that off as being acceptable in the United States of America, which it's not? Prisoners have rights. Criminals sometimes have more rights than the victims. You know that. How on earth did they pass us off as being okay?
So, as you know, Steve, Steve, the legal system is not always great in the country as it is. But, I'm not a lawyer, but I've studied case law. Pretrial detainees are supposed, you're right, they are supposed to have the same protections as any citizen. They just can't leave when they want to leave the jail. But that just was not the case. And unfortunately, and this is something I've learned from studying, a lot of case law, is that judges, even if they're not bad guys, they tend to actually not want to intervene in what the jails and the prisons are doing because they see it as overstepping the boundaries between the branches. I don't really agree with that, but that's something that's kind of just ingrained in penology or in our system. And there is, again, the fact that people just use January 6th as an excuse to target their political opponents. And unfortunately... Which is
exactly what they're still doing. Right. So that's what they're still doing. Let me ask you this, because I do want to ask you about the felony here. The one felony, now you spent 12 years as an Army reservist prior to the January 6th events, whatever people make of them, charged with obstruction of an official proceeding, which your only felony, by the way. This is part of 1512C2, which is being reviewed by the Supreme Court. This is what's going in front of the Supreme Court, and if it's overturned by the High Court, you'll be exonerated, and your felony will be removed from your record. Is that correct?
That's correct, Steve. Yes, the 1512 charge, for those who aren't aware, it's called obstruction of an official proceeding, but the true name of the statute is tampering with a witness. It goes back to the 80s. The sub-statute we're being charged with, though, was added after 2003 for the Enron scandal when it came to tampering with documents. So they're using it to say that we obstructed an official proceeding, and that was obstruction somehow. It's a completely misplaced statute or even substatute. But I want to say to the audience, and this is an personal experience, I witnessed this, this is something the public needs to know, this statute that's being used against January 6th defendants was actually, it was planned from the beginning to use against President Trump. And I know this because Antifa informants were planted in the D.C. jail with us to sabotage our cases. And some of them admitted, they confessed that they went to the Capitol to entrap people so they could get out of drug charges from 2020 because they were caught in drug conspiracies. This is relevant because the first two defendants to have the 1512 charge upheld by the district court were those informants who confessed to it. So the 1512 charge was first upheld in federal court for federal informants. It makes it look like this is all just a dog and pony show.
So they did that. So what you're saying that it was a smokescreen. It was a con. That's what you're saying, that it was all a con to basically say, here's what's going to happen. So what happened to those first two? They go through the process, they plead guilty, however that works, and then later they're exonerated? Is that how that's supposed to play out?
I mean, basically, yeah. One of them, his name is Nathan DeGrave. He got a slap on the wrist. He got like a 3-year sentence, which by the time he got sentenced, he's out of there. He got a cooperation agreement, and he's in the wind. The other one, his co-defendant, he's in a federal prison, but he's somehow posting on Twitter after midnight. So, I mean, I'm not telling any tales out of school here, but it kind of is what it is. Unfortunately, not all January 6th defendants are the same. And it's important for people to understand, I have my faults. You'll hear if you look me up, you're going to see all kinds of terrible stuff that the government says about me. But I'm still the same internet troll that I've been my entire life. You got people who went to the Capitol and they have completely different personalities than they tell the public. You have people who claim they've been in solitary confinement for 3 years, but they've been doing interviews for 3 years. Most of the guys I was locked up with were working on our cases. It's like, why are these guys just doing interviews all the time and they're not working on their cases? It's kind of, unfortunately, there are a lot of plants pretending to be Trump supporters, and not everybody who was at the Capitol, unfortunately, was there for the right reason.
Let me ask you this. Do you think that, not only that, but the entire event was fabricated in some way? People make that accusation. I ask you, do you believe it was a fabricated event that was then trumped up, for lack of a better term, to create this entanglement? We've got about 20 seconds for the last word.
Yes, sir. I'm glad that Ray Epps has become a household name lately, but the truth is that he had a lot of people working for him. So yes, sir, when you go through the video, there are a lot of agitators who are clearly planted in the crowd along the bike racks to agitate, to justify the excessive force from the police. It was, not all of it, but a lot of it, was staged. And I have video, and I'm releasing it on Twitter. So I hope people, please support Patriot Freedom Project. Support the families, but try to look at a lot of the discovery that has been hidden from us.
Real quickly, where can they find you on Twitter? Where can they find you?
They can find me at Tim Hale, criminally funny J6er. And they can find Patriot Freedom Project at Real PFP.
Got to leave it right there. Tim, good to see you. Thank you for being here.